The sound of a gunshot is nothing like what they show in the movies. Leah Cass knew that better than most people in Hargrove County ever would. But on the morning everything changed, she was just standing behind the circulation desk of the Hargrove Public Library wearing her cardigan with the frayed left cuff, trying not to make eye contact with Deputy Director Vance Holloway as he walked past her station for the third time that hour. Holloway didn't say anything. He never did, not directly. He had a way of looking at Leah that communicated everything he needed to without a word. A long, slow glance that traveled from the stack of returned books she was processing down to her sensible flats, then back up again before he turned and walked away. It was the look you gave a piece of furniture you were thinking about replacing. Leah sorted the returns and said nothing. She had been at the Hargrove Public Library for 7 months. She'd taken the job because it was quiet, because nobody asked many questions, and because the commute was 12 minutes from the small house she rented on Calvert Street, where she kept the blinds mostly closed and the spare bedroom empty. She shelved books with the same focused precision she'd once used to field strip a rifle in the dark. She processed interlibrary loans and updated the digital catalog, and occasionally helped elderly patrons navigate the computer terminals. And she was very, very good at going unnoticed. That was the point. Holloway had been deputy director for 2 years before Leah arrived, and in his estimation, she had been a mistake from the first day. She'd been hired by the previous director, a woman named Cora Finley, who'd retired to Tucson, and Holloway had made no secret of his feelings about inheriting Leah as part of the package. She was too quiet, he said. She didn't engage enough with patrons. She had no personality for a public-facing role. Once, during a staff meeting, he'd said, with the whole team present, that the library needed people who projected warmth and enthusiasm, and then looked directly at Leah while saying it, as if she were a visual aid. Her colleague Britta, who sat 2 desks over and had a collection of ceramic frogs on her windowsill, had caught Leah's eye afterward and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Leah had just shaken her head slightly. It was fine. She'd been in rooms where people were trying to actually kill her. Holloway was not a problem, but he was relentless in the way that small, territorial men often are. In March, he'd reassigned her from the reference desk to the basement archive, citing a need to reorganize the collection workflow. The basement archive had no windows, no foot traffic, and no air conditioning that functioned correctly. Leah had reorganized 16 years of uncatalogued periodicals in 3 weeks, completed a full preservation assessment, and submitted a 12-page report with recommendations. Holloway had read approximately 1 paragraph of it, based on the single comment he'd left in the margin, formatting inconsistent. She went back to the basement and kept working. The other staff members were kind to her in the careful, slightly guilty way people are kind to someone they've watched being treated unfairly. Britta brought her coffee sometimes. Owen, the young man who ran the children's program, always saved her a seat at staff meetings. A part-time cataloger named Junes stopped by the basement occasionally just to chat, which Leah genuinely appreciated even though she never said much. They were good people. They were trying. Leah didn't tell any of them that she had spent 6 years as a combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment. She didn't tell them about the 4 deployments, or the field surgeries she'd performed in conditions no surgical team in any hospital in America would consider remotely acceptable, or the 18 months she'd spent, afterward, working a classified program that she still could not discuss, not even now. Not even here in the basement of a public library in a small North Carolina county, where the biggest news story last year had been a zoning dispute over a Dairy Queen. She shelved periodicals and said nothing. The morning of April 14th started like every other morning. Leah arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes before the library opened. She made a pot of coffee in the break room. The good coffee, the real stuff. Not the institutional blend Holloway bought in bulk, and she drank it standing at the window looking out at the parking lot while the day shifted from gray to pale gold. Holloway came in at 8:03 and walked directly to her. Cass. He had a habit of using only her last name, which he seemed to feel established some kind of authority. The Dunmore donations boxes are in the loading bay. I need them processed and cataloged by end of week. Leah looked at him. That's roughly 400 items. I'm aware. By Friday. That's what I said. She nodded once. Okay. He waited, perhaps hoping for some sign of distress, some crack in her composure that would justify the assignment. He didn't get one. He turned and left. Britta appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He gave you the Dunmore boxes? He did. Leah, that's. Britta stopped herself. Do you want help after my shift? I'll be fine. Thank you. She was in the loading bay by 9, when the library opened to the public, and she worked through the morning with the quiet, methodical focus that was the only mode she knew. The Dunmore collection was a mess. An estate donation from a family that had apparently never thrown a book away in 4 generations. And the boxes were packed, without any logic or system. Paperback westerns, mixed in with leather-bound ledgers from the 1880s, Reader's Digest condensed editions side by side, with what appeared to be a genuine first edition of something that made Leah stop and look more carefully. She set it aside and kept going. At 11:20, she heard the commotion upstairs. She recognized it not because it was loud. It wasn't, not at first, but because of the quality of the sound. There are certain frequencies of human distress that most people have never trained themselves to distinguish. Leah had. She stood up from the box she was unpacking and tilted her head slightly, the way an animal will when it catches a scent on the wind. Raised voices. Movement that was too fast for a normal library afternoon, and underneath it, something she hadn't heard in a long time, a sound like a door being forced. She was at the stairs before she'd made a conscious decision to move. The main floor of the library was not what she expected. She'd constructed scenarios in the 2 seconds it took her to climb the stairs. Medical emergency, argument, someone's toddler having a meltdown near the audiobooks. What she found instead was 3 men she didn't recognize standing near the reference desk, and everyone else frozen. One of the men had his hand on Owen's arm. Not a friendly grip. Leah took in the room in the way she'd been trained. Threat assessment, 2 seconds. Automatic. 3 men, late 20s to mid-30s, positioned at points that suggested they'd walked in together and spread out deliberately. The one holding Owen was nearest the front door. The second was near the computer terminals, and he was watching Britta. The third was behind the main desk, going through the drawer where the staff kept their personal items. Phones, wallets, keys. Not robbery. The body language was wrong for robbery. They weren't moving quickly enough, weren't nervous enough. They were looking for something specific. The one at the desk looked up when Leah came through the door from the stairwell. He had pale eyes and a jawline like something cut from quarried stone, and he looked at her the same way Holloway did, the glance that said, "Not relevant, not a factor." "Library's closed," he said. "Get back downstairs." Leah didn't move. "I said get back. I heard you." Her voice was completely flat, not aggressive, not afraid. Just flat, in a way that made him look at her a second time. "What are you looking for?" The man with pale eyes. She'd clocked him as the leader based on position, and the fact that the other 2 kept glancing at him. Studied her for a moment. "None of your business. Go back downstairs and stay there until we're done." Leah looked at Owen. He was 17, worked the children's program, had been excited last week about a summer reading initiative he'd designed himself. He was trying very hard not to look as scared as he was, and failing. She looked at Britta. Britta's ceramic frogs were visible on the windowsill behind her. Her hands were clasped together in front of her the way they got when she was upset about something. Leah looked back at the man with pale eyes. "Let him go," she said. There was a beat of silence that stretched thin. The leader made a small, almost amused sound. He nodded to the man holding Owen, who tightened his grip slightly. Not releasing. Tightening, and Leah watched Owen's face go white. She was already moving before the grip tightened. What happened next took approximately 11 seconds. Leah had once been timed at neutralizing a 3-man threat scenario in 9, but that was a controlled environment, and she was a little rusty. 11 was acceptable. She reached the man holding Owen first because he was closest, and because Owen was the most immediate vulnerable point. The man had at least 6 inches and 70 pounds on her. He released Owen and turned toward her with the confidence of someone who had never once lost a physical confrontation with a woman who looked like a librarian. He lost this one. She put him on the floor in a movement that looked almost gentle from the outside. A pivot, a shift of weight, a redirection of his own momentum that ended with him face down on the carpet between the picture books and the early chapter readers with his arm at an angle that made further participation inadvisable. The second man, the one near the computer terminals, was already moving toward her. He was faster than the first, more trained. She registered that upgrade in threat level in the half-second between engagements and adjusted accordingly. He got closer than the first man before she ended the encounter, which resulted in a shelving unit near the periodicals taking some damage it would not recover from, and a fairly spectacular collision with the corner of the circulation desk that Leah felt it was more responsible to let happen to him than to her. He went down near the self-checkout station and did not get up. The third man, the one with pale eyes who had been behind the desk, had not moved. He was watching her now with a completely different expression than the one he'd had 30 seconds ago. The amusement was gone. In its place was something more careful, more calibrated. "Whoever you are," he said slowly, "you're making a mistake." "I get that a lot." Leah's breathing was even. It annoyed her slightly that it wasn't. There was a small elevated catch she could feel, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline she'd spent 20 years learning to manage. "Put the drawer contents back. Leave the way you came. We can end this here." He looked at her for a long moment. His hand moved toward his jacket. Leah said very quietly, "I wouldn't." He'd worked with people who could read a room. He recognized that she was one of them. His hand stopped. "What's in the drawer?" Leah asked. He didn't answer. "You came in here with 2 trained personnel and you went straight to the staff desk. You knew what you were looking for. Which means you know who you're looking for." She kept her eyes on him, and her voice stayed level. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd like you to think very carefully before you answer. What's in the drawer?" The pale-eyed man looked at her, and something shifted in his face, not softening. He wasn't the type for softening. More like a recalculation. A professional recognizing another professional. "You have no idea what you just walked into," he said. "Maybe not, but I know what you walked into." Leah tilted her head toward the 2 men on the floor. "Put the drawer contents back." He held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then, with the measured deliberateness of a man who was cataloging this moment for future reference, he set the items from the drawer back onto the desk surface, turned, and walked out the front entrance. The glass door swung shut behind him. Nobody moved. Then Owen said, in a voice barely above a whisper, What did you?" "Call 911, Leah said. "Tell them you need 2 units and a bus." She was already moving toward the man near the self-checkout station, checking pulse, checking airway. "Britta, is anyone hurt? Does anyone need medical attention?" Britta made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Britta, look at me." Leah's voice was calm. Not cold, calm, which is different, though most people can't tell from the outside. "Is anyone hurt?" Britta shook her head. Her eyes were very wide. No, I don't. We're okay, I think." "Good." Leah turned back to the man on the floor. His pulse was strong. His airway was clear. The angle of his arm was going to be uncomfortable for a while, but he was not in danger. "Owen, 911, right now. Can you do that?" Owen had his phone out in 3 seconds. His hands were shaking, but his voice, when the dispatcher answered, was steady. Leah made a note of that. He was a good kid. She was running a secondary check on the first man when she heard the door from the back offices open and Vance Holloway walked onto the main floor. He took in the scene. 2 men on the ground, the displaced shelving unit, the contents of the staff drawer spread across the desk surface. Leah crouched next to an unconscious man checking for a head injury, and his face went through several phases in quick succession. Confusion, alarm, and then, as his eyes landed on Leah, something she recognized as the specific outrage of a person whose established narrative is being disrupted. He looked at the men on the floor. He looked at the shelving unit. He looked at Leah. "What did you do?" Leah stood up. 3 men entered the library at approximately 11:20. 2 of them are on the floor. The third left on his own. "I've asked Owen to call 911. You. Holloway's face was working through something. "You put those men on the ground?" "Yes, you, Deputy Director Holloway," Leah said, with the same patience she used when explaining the interlibrary loan system to a first-time patron. "The sheriff's department will be here in a few minutes. It would be helpful if you could make sure all staff are accounted for and see if anyone needs medical attention. I need to secure the scene." She turned her back on him. She heard him make a sound, the specific, sputtering sound of a man who had never once had someone turn their back on him mid-sentence, but she was already moving. The sheriff's department arrived in 4 minutes. Leah met them at the door, gave them a calm and complete accounting of events, and stood aside to let them work. She answered every question directly. She said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am," at the appropriate intervals. She did not editorialize. The 2 deputies who interviewed her were professional. The lead detective, who arrived 20 minutes later, a compact, careful woman named Weston, who had the eyes of someone who had seen enough to stop being surprised, asked Leah 3 times, in 3 different ways, how exactly she had incapacitated 2 adult males who each outweighed her by more than 60 pounds. "Training," Leah said each time. "What kind of training?" "The kind I had before I became a librarian." Detective Weston looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to need to be more specific than that, Ms. Cass." "I know," Leah said, "and I will be. But I'd like to know what those men were looking for first, if that's something you can tell me." Weston studied her. "Why would that matter to you?" "Because I don't think they came here by accident," Leah said. "And if they didn't come here by accident, then someone in this building may still be at risk. That matters to me." Weston was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "We believe they were looking for an individual. Someone who may have witnessed something they need to contain." She paused. "We don't know yet who that individual is." Leah nodded. She suspected as much from the moment she saw the leader going through the staff drawer. Phones. Wallets. ID, they were looking for a name. She helped where she could for the next 2 hours, then went back to the Dunmore boxes in the basement because there was still a first edition down there that needed to be properly assessed, and also because she needed 10 minutes of quiet and the basement was the quietest place she knew. She was back downstairs for approximately 7 minutes when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She expected Britta. Maybe Owen. It was Holloway. He stood in the doorway of the basement archive with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the contemptuous dismissals of the past 7 months. Not the territorial irritation. This was something stripped down, something almost raw, the face of a man who had watched his model of the world fail to account for something important. He looked at Leah sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a box of donated paperbacks, cataloging by lamplight, and he didn't say anything for a moment. "Holloway," Leah said, without looking up. "Did you need something?" "The detective upstairs," he said slowly. "She said you were." He stopped. Started again. "She said that the men who came in were connected to an organized threat network. That you probably saved." Another stop. "That if you hadn't intervened, I did intervene," Leah said simply. "Everyone's okay." He was quiet for another moment. "Cass," he said finally. Who exactly are you?" Leah set down the book she was holding. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 7 months, she let him see just a fraction of what was actually behind her eyes. Not as a performance, not to make a point, but because he was asking a real question and he deserved a real answer. "I'm your cataloger," she said. "I'm also someone who spent 6 years as a ranger medic and another 18 months doing work I can't fully describe. I came here because I was tired and I wanted something quiet. And I'm good at this job, and I like it." She held his gaze. "I have never once been a problem for this library, Deputy Director. I've been an asset. I would appreciate it if you treated me like one." Holloway looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he nodded, once stiffly, like a man unaccustomed to the motion. Right, he said. Okay. He turned toward the stairs, then stopped with his hand on the railing. The Dunmore deadline. Take the time you need. He went back upstairs. Leah watched the empty doorway for a moment. Then she picked up the book and went back to work. The next morning arrived gray and damp, with the kind of April rain that makes everything smell like wet concrete and possibility. Leah parked in the library lot at 7:42, 3 minutes earlier than usual, and was halfway to the entrance when she heard the vehicles. 2 of them. Black, nondescript government plates. She stopped walking. 4 people got out of the first vehicle. She recognized 2 of them immediately. The kind of recognition that lives in the body before it reaches the mind. The recognition of people you have been through things with that have no adequate civilian translation. The other 2, she placed within seconds from context and carriage and the specific way they held themselves in a parking lot at 7:45 in the morning, when they were there on business. The man who reached her first was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by years of sun and wind and the particular strain of a life spent in places where the stakes were never small. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a canvas jacket, but he wore them the way a uniform is worn. His name was Rourke. She had known him for 11 years. She had kept him alive in a drainage ditch in conditions she still thought about sometimes at 2 in the morning. Cass, he said. Rourke. Heard you had some excitement yesterday. It was handled. Yeah. Something moved through his expression, respect, and something warmer underneath it, something that people who didn't know Rourke would have missed entirely. It was. The 4 of them fanned out slightly as they approached. Not a threat posture, a habit. The automatic positioning of people who had long ago stopped thinking consciously about sightlines and cover. Leah recognized the woman at the far right. Petra, who had served 2 years with her before being transferred to a unit she was not permitted to name, and who had a scar along her jaw from an encounter in a country that had never been officially acknowledged. Petra nodded at Leah. Leah nodded back. We're not here about yesterday, Rourke said, or not entirely. He paused. The network those men were working for. We've been tracking it for 8 months. Yesterday was the first time they moved on domestic soil. I figured it wasn't random. It wasn't. And the reason they were here, he stopped, looked at her carefully. Leah, the person they were looking for, the witness they needed to contain. She waited. It was you. The rain came down steady and even on the parking lot. Somewhere behind them, a car on the county road slowed for the light. I haven't been active in 3 years, Leah said. You don't have to have been active. They found a thread that led back to the 21 operation, the one in February. He watched her face. You were the only one who saw what happened to the handler. You're the only one who can place Deschamps' network at that location on that date. Leah was quiet for a moment. She had not thought about February 2021 for a long time. She had made a deliberate and sustained effort not to think about it. Okay, she said finally. Okay, Rourke repeated. That's all you've got? What else would you like me to say? Something passed through his face that might have been a smile, in a man who smiled more readily. We need your statement, full debrief, on record, with oversight. It's the piece we've been missing. He paused. And we'd like you to consult on the next phase. Voluntarily. You can say no. Can I finish cataloging the Dunmore donation first? He stared at her. It's a significant collection, Leah said. There's a first edition in there that needs to be properly assessed before it goes into general storage. Rourke turned to Petra. Petra was looking at the sky with the expression of someone maintaining composure through an act of will. The Dunmore donation, Rourke said, turning back to Leah. It's been in a family basement for 60 years. Another week won't hurt it, but it needs to be done correctly. There was a pause. You know, Rourke said, when I tried to picture what you'd be doing when we found you, I had a lot of scenarios. A quiet librarian in North Carolina worried about a book donation was not. Did you drive all the way here just to criticize my career choices? No. He said it without the levity this time. Steady, direct. The voice he'd used in the drainage ditch, in the debriefs, in the moments when things were actually serious. I drove here because you're the best I've ever seen and we need you. And because those men yesterday were not the last ones they'll send." Leah looked at him. She looked at Petra, at the other two agents, standing quietly in the rain with the patience of people accustomed to waiting. She thought about the Dunmore boxes and the first edition in them, and about Owen, who had kept his voice steady when it mattered, and Britta with her ceramic frogs, and the quiet of the basement where she'd spent 7 months being exactly who she'd needed to be for a while. "Give me until Friday," she said. "The Dunmore collection. Then we talk." Rourke nodded. Leah looked past him toward the library entrance. Through the glass doors, she could see the lights coming on inside as staff arrived. Britta at the coffee maker, Owen setting up the children's corner, the ordinary morning rhythm of a place she had come to in order to disappear and had stayed in because, in ways she hadn't expected, it had started to feel like somewhere. She turned back to Rourke. "And I'm not leaving the library," she said. "Whatever consulting means, I do it from here." Rourke looked at her for a moment. "From the library." "From the library." He glanced back at Petra again. Petra had given up on the sky and was now studying the parking lot with great interest. "Okay," Rourke said. "From the library." Leah nodded once. She turned and walked to the entrance. At the glass door, she paused, not turning around, and said, "There's good coffee in the break room. You and your team can come in out of the rain." She pushed open the door and went inside. Behind her, she heard Rourke say something quietly to the others. She didn't hear the words, but she heard, just barely, the sound of Petra finally laughing, the low, genuine laugh of someone who had been holding it in for a while. Leah let herself smile, just slightly, just for a second, before she reached the circulation desk and put her things down and got to work.